Welcome to you all. We're celebrating the life of Denis Joseph Baylis this afternoon, but our Remembering Denis occasion also has a unique musical component. And I want to welcome Rupert Jeffrett, Lawrence White and Edmund White for their presence and participation today, and for all their hard work and rehearsals that have led to this occasion. Rupert has composed a new setting for Eliot's poem, "Oh May I Join the Invisible Choir," part of which was read at Denis's funeral in September. We shall be hearing the world premiere this afternoon. Thank you to Keith Cargan for helping to set up this event, for bringing the George Eliot Fellowship together with the musicians in this lovely building. Thank you to Linda Burton and the church elders for allowing us to use the church, which was here when Mary Ann was a girl. And thank you to Alan, the minister here, for recording the occasion for us.
It is so good to see so many of us here together for this event, to share our memories of dear Denis, to pay tribute to a life well lived. The individual tributes we shall hear this afternoon are from Denis's friends in the George Eliot Fellowship and the Bedworth Society. Most of us came to know Denis through our shared love of and admiration for locally born but of international renown, George Eliot. All the music today has been chosen with Denis in mind. He was passionate about music and would have been thrilled by what the musicians have prepared for us today.
Gentle bonds are in, so cheered at heart thou goest through earth's deep grave to heaven, through earth's deep grave to heaven. The chains of fear are broken, hope's star is bright aloft. Oft has this truth been spoken, but never once too oft.
Denis Joseph Baylis. Not your typical Bedworth kid. Denis was born in 1933 in Wootton Street, Bedworth, at the home of his maternal grandparents. At the time, his mum and dad, Teresa and George Baylis, lived in West Avenue with his sister Joan. When he was 2, in 1935, the family, which later included a younger brother, Tony, moved to a newly built house in Margaret Avenue. This was the Bedworth home that Denis grew up in, and the house to which he returned on retirement and lived in for the rest of his life. It was a terraced house with a big bay window facing south, through which the sun could pour all day long. It was from these windows that on a fateful November night in 1940, the family watched the amazing red sky and leaping flames of the Coventry Blitz. It was a vivid and unforgettable memory that Denis never forgot. Neither did he forget the Anderson shelter in their garden, where he and the family spent so many nights. George Baylis, Denis's father, had a steady job in the co-op, eventually becoming a manager of the newly opened Newtown Road branch of the co-op, which was just around the corner from the family home in Margaret Avenue. But George was also the choir leader at St Francis of Assisi's Roman Catholic Church in Bedworth. And Denis attended St Francis of Assisi School with his siblings, older sister Joan and later younger brother Tony. It's not surprising, therefore, with the influence of both parents and church, that Denis's interest in classical music grew and blossomed, along with the love of literature, theatre, and all the arts. From this family-nurtured childhood in Bedworth, Denis went on to attend boarding school in Droitwich and university in London, where he gained a degree in history. He then stayed and worked in the capital, where there was so much availability and exposure to culture in its widest context. In the early 80s, Denis first heard of the Bedworth Society, which was a new civic society, amenity society, and he heard about this on his visits back home. He would read about its formation and agenda from the newly launched Bedworth Echo, and he joined the society straight away. He soon got involved in monthly meetings, in writing articles for the Bedworth Echo, and eventually joined the committee, becoming press officer and minutes secretary. His opinions were valued and were always relevant. He was deeply flattered when asked to become a vice president of the Bedworth Society just a few years ago. Denis introduced and organised so many trips and holidays for the Society, always so well organised and researched, and always fully booked. The first day trip was to Stamford, to follow up on its use as the setting for the hugely popular BBC adaptation of George Eliot's Middlemarch. A whole series followed that first successful outing, and we went on to have longer breaks in different parts of the country, and also abroad, to visit Monet's Garden, Bruges, Norway, Edinburgh, and most notably Paris and Versailles. But it was not just trips and holidays that Denis organised for the Bedworth Society. There were trips to the RSC in Stratford, to Birmingham Hippodrome for productions from the Royal Ballet and from Matthew Vaughan's ballet. There were ex-cathedral concerts and famously the annual trips to the Thursford Christmas Spectacular. With increasing age and disability, and he would have been 90 in a few weeks' time, Denis found it necessary to give up the role of secretary. But he still took an interest in the development of the Heritage Centre and the Society's work, and got to meetings whenever he could. Much of what I have said this afternoon is adapted from Denis's own words, and is taken from reports and emails he sent to me, and also from his contributions to exhibitions at the Heritage Centre, the originals of which, along with albums of Bedworth Society photographs, are available for you to look at in the church hall later. A final quote directly from Denis. I haven't had space or time to say all the things I might have. I am so grateful for all the Bedworth Society has given to me, and its future remains dear to my heart. We, in turn, should say, we are so grateful, Denis, for all that you gave to the Bedworth Society, and you will ever remain dear in our hearts.
Thank you, Linda. That was a wonderful start. Denis often said to me, how much he valued John and Linda Burton and how they made all the difference to him when he returned here from his university work in London. How his London friends said to him, "You can't go back there." But Denis was determined to return and never regretted it for a moment. Here he found not only a return to his roots, with the regular engagement with his beloved family, his sister Joan, brother Tony, then his nephews, Paul, and Rob and his wife June are here today, and we're so glad you have come and so grateful you came. And he adored his great nieces and nephews, and so he reconnected with his family, and it's so beautiful he returned to the family home. But don't ever say that the Midlands is a cultural desert. It's just full of ideas and art and music and culture. So he took advantage, as Linda has said. And it was his life in Bedworth, but we'll talk about Coventry later, the music scene in Birmingham, the RSC in Stratford. Of course there were lots of trips back to London, to art galleries and museums, of course, and shows and concerts. But primarily here it was joining the George Eliot Fellowship, from which he really drank deeply.
Well, as you heard from Linda, Denis was still working at London University when we started the Bedworth Society in 1981. But his interest was there, even at a distance. And I think I'm right in saying that his membership number was 11. Numbers 1 to 10 being those of the officers and committee. Once he retired, he was able to become more involved with the Bedworth Society and the George Eliot Fellowship. But Denis was much liked and highly respected, and his ability to talk to all sorts of people, despite his shyness, which at times showed itself as a stutter, though it disappeared as he warmed to his subjects and sensed the sympathy of his audience. Here are a couple of comments. One from Councillor Carl Evans, who is at least 50 years younger than Denis. and on the opposite political side. But Carl wrote to me this week, as councillors, we probably shouldn't have favourite constituents. However, Denis was the exception. I had the huge honour of representing him as a resident of Margaret Avenue for several years. Our politics were completely different, but Denis was able to differentiate between local and national issues. And this is what I liked about him. We worked very closely together on the borough plan and the plan to tarmac much of George Eliot's country for housing. He was always on hand if I needed any historical context to some planning matter because of his several decades of involvement with the Bedworth Society. And another man full of praise for Denis was Ian Pearson. And Ian it was and is the manager of Harry Shaw Travel. So we were good customers. But nevertheless, Ian was full of praise for Denis. And he wrote, I always enjoyed my visits to his home, when he always made me feel welcome with a freshly brewed coffee and biscuits or homemade pre-Christmas mince pies. He was an absolute pleasure to work with. His knowledge of places to visit and his overriding consideration for what he hoped to achieve for his fellow members and friends who put trust in what he promoted was second to none. You knew him far better than I did, but I think anyone who knew Denis or came into his company will be well aware of his selfless attitude and kindness. It has been my privilege to know and assist Denis, and I will always be grateful for the knowledge he passed on to me, broadening my understanding of his beloved George Eliot and the Bedworth Society, along with the local Bedworth and Nuneaton area. I last saw Denis in November 2021 after a Thursford spectacular, when we discussed the show over a cup of coffee and a few of his favourite white Lindt chocolates. I meet many different and diverse people in my job, but Denis was an absolute pleasure to get to know and work with over the years, and I will miss my visits to Margaret Avenue.
to ask to say a few words about Denis, lovely Denis. Under the heading of educator, but I'd like to add mentor as well, so we can have educator / mentor. And then I thought about it, and it was of mind, body and soul. And I thought of 3 good examples. And then I could separate them as mind, body and soul in every example. So the first one is the book. I first got to spend time with Denis when the George Eliot Fellowship began having book groups at Grib, where we were going to look at the piecemeal, which I was so thrilled about because I can read them, I don't really understand the depths of George Eliot's work, so it was a real treat to be offered this. And have discussion with people who understood and layer on the extra knowledge for me to contemplate. So that's where I first met Denis, and then we went on to the Bedworth Houses, which became a bit like home to be there. Then, when we were at Bedworth Houses, Denis walks in the first time I was there with his bag of shopping, and it's just such a lovely sight. Something so ordinary that he's brought in milk, juices, but special ones, they weren't ordinary orange juice, and biscuits. And I'm a bit of a biscuit snob at times, and they were always very nice biscuits. So he got extra stars from me for that. And then, of course, we had all the learning and the discussions, and he was such a light touch. He was a co-leader, and each one bounced off each other. And to have the opportunity to be able to learn from people who know so much more in that way is just a delight. I didn't even need to sit on the back row as I would have done at school, so that was another plus. And then I had the good fortune to go on the Florence trip. Denis' first one learned from the George Eliot Fellowship. And one of the hidden extras, because he seemed to put these in as they were like bonus extras in the trip. And one was to go to a church. We went down through some great big wooden doors, down an alleyway, turned around down another alleyway. I had no idea where we were going to. The doors open, it's a wonderful church. We go in there, and it's for Vespers, and we all sit there. To my amazement, people come in with bags of shopping, briefcases, just coming out of work, and then gradually it all settled down, and we were in this beautiful stillness. And then nuns walked in, and I'm not sure whether they were monks or whether they were trained with priests. They came in as well, just about 3 of them, and they started singing. My goodness, my heart nearly burst. It was just, I'm still convinced it was angels singing. I've no backing up theory for this at all, but it was just heaven, and I hear it still in my head all these years later. But it's just a magical moment in my life, and I think perhaps for other people too, but because I never had the chance to talk to those. This is, for me, this is a big thank you, Denis. You just gave me so much, and perhaps we never know just how much you gave to others as well. I was going to do this without any tears, but never mind. Thank you.
Come away, death, and in sad cypress let me be laid. Fly away, fly away, fly away, My shroud of white stuck all with you, my shroud, oh prepare it, my part of death, no one so true, no one so true did share it, did share it. Not a flower, not a flower, not a flower sweet, on my black coffin let there be strown. Not a friend, not a friend, not a friend, greet my poor corpse, where my bones shall be thrown, 1,000 sighs to save. Lay me, lay me, lay me, oh, where sad true lover never find my grave. To weep there, where sad true lover ne find my grave, ne find my grave, to weep there, to weep there, to weep there.
I'm speaking today more as co-editor of the George Eliot Review than anything else, since it's in that capacity that I've had contact with the academic and scholarly side of Denis's life, which, as we are hearing today, was the life of a deeply cultured man. This contact goes back about 5 years ago, to the point when my fellow editor Tony Van Broek and I received from Denis a draft of an article entitled Dancing on the Edge, a reading of the Spanish Gypsy, which he hoped would be considered for publication in the review. And Tony and I both remember well working with Denis. He had been, of course, an academic editor for the London University Institute's publications, but as he explained in his accompanying letter, this was his first attempt at a scholarly article on George Eliot, and he was keen to hear what we thought of it and whether it would pass muster for the review. Well, of course it did. The article was indeed very promising and informed by his deep scholarship and wide reading and all the rest of it. But I suppose given the complexity of its argument, it did need a bit of editorial intervention, which I'm glad to say Tony Van Broek, as the editor of George Eliot's poetry, was well placed to provide, as I was not. And it's characteristic of Denis that he received all the suggestions for little interventions here and changes there with absolute good grace. So the resulting article was indeed a fine piece of work, which duly appeared in the 2018 review, where it still is, if anybody would like to read it, in the back number. And essentially, Denis argued for Wagner's influence on George Eliot. He began by drawing similarities between Vidalma's dance in the Plaza Santiago, described by George Eliot as reaching, quote, the outer edge of unknown rapture, and the connections between that and the music of Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. After tracing George Eliot's own interest in and appreciation of Wagner's music, and after focusing in on Isolde's Song of Love and Death, which is better known as the Liebestod aria, he pointed out that Wagner actually referred to this Liebestod aria as a Verklärung, which in German means transfiguration. And Denis went on to argue convincingly that Vidalma's dance captures a similar moment of intensity that can also be described as precisely a transfiguration. And he went on to draw a number of other affinities between Wagner's music and George Eliot's poetry to support his case. And this sensitive reading of the Spanish Gypsy was informed by his wide reading and his scholarly knowledge, stretching in one direction to Wordsworth and Coleridge, Tintern Abbey and Coleridge's distinction between fancy and imagination and all that, and in the another direction to Kant and Herder and Schopenhauer, because Denis was clearly very interested in the history of ideas and very knowledgeable about it. So his article, which I've actually been rereading with pleasure and instruction, is a very fine example of the sort of thing that we as editors really like to receive. It's new, interesting, well-researched, and springs from a real engagement with the subject. For Denis really knew his Wagner as he certainly deeply knew his George Eliot. We were very fortunate to receive this article. And I've actually been reminded of it recently by another article on George Eliot and Wagner in a collection of essays from Australia called Antipodean George Eliot. That collection contains one article by Robert Dingley, which underlines how right Denis was in seeing Wagner as an influence on George Eliot, because Bingley argues persuasively that, in fact, George Eliot probably knew much more about Wagner's ideas on music than people have argued before, and she probably did know his notorious article on Jewishness and music. And what she did in Daniel Deronda was precisely to take some of those arguments, work them into her prose, and at the same time refute Wagner's notorious anti-Semitism. And she does it by putting into the mouth of a Jewish musician and composer, Klezmer, precisely those arguments about musical culture that Wagner sets out in that essay on Jewishness and music. So she both uses Wagner and disowns him at the same time. And I think it's very interesting that Denis was ahead of the field with his own argument about the Spanish gypsy, showing how George Eliot could take something from Wagner and work it into her own writing for her own distinctive purposes. Now, in this article that I'm talking about, that we published in 2018, Denis also mentions the Fellowship's trip to Spain, which he organised, and one scene he recalls is the thrilling effect the flamenco music and dance had on the reading group when they visited gypsy caves on Sacramonte Hill near Granada. The trip had been partly inspired, I think, by two of the participants in the earlier visit to Florence, which Denis also organised, with these two participants saying how much they would really love to visit the setting of the Spanish gypsy. So Denis, of course, took them up on that. The two participants were Connie Fulmer and Margaret Barfield from California, well known as scholars and enthusiasts of George Eliot, and they duly joined the group that Denis took to Spain, and clearly absolutely revelled in the experience. They became firm friends with Denis, and when very sadly and unexpectedly Connie died in March 2020, it was Denis who wrote the warm and eloquent obituary of her, which we published in the review of August of that year. And he ended his moving tribute by describing the last Christmas card he received from Connie and Margaret, which bore on it a coloured photo of the two of them on the beach in California. And it, to use Denis's own words, with the waves rolling in behind them, they are breaking into a celebratory dance like Fidalgo, and heaps of white hellebores and gloriously red poinsettias lie at their feet. So I think that card wasn't only a celebration of Christmas, I think it was also clearly a tribute to Denis and his enthusiasm for the Spanish gypsy. And those of you who went with him to Spain will no doubt have memories of Denis which will be as touching and as colourful as that scene he describes in his obituary. Now, I cannot say that I knew Denis well, and I much regret now that I didn't get to know him better by going on one of the trips he so successfully organised. But I do have clear memories of him from his latter years, mainly, at fellowship events, as a gentle, even diffident presence. But behind that retiring exterior, there shone clearly a keen intelligence, an artistic sensitivity, and a great intellectual curiosity. And it's from those, I think, that we have all benefited, especially those who went on the cultural trips that Denis organised. And it was no surprise to me to learn that in his retirement, he attained an MA with distinction from Sarah College in Salisbury. And as he confessed himself in his last years, he was still exploring George Eliot in relation to the history of ideas in which he was so interested, in particular the work of Spinoza and Feuerbach. So in all, Denis was clearly a deeply cultured man whose enthusiasm was communicated to many people. And I think I can sum him up really best by using George Eliot's own words from that poem, May I Join the Choir Invisible, which we're going to hear set to music later this afternoon. In it, she mentions in scorn for miserable aims that end with self, with their mild persistence urge man's search to vaster issues. And the poem continues, so to live is heaven, to make undying music in the world. So what better way to honour and commemorate Denis's rich life than with the music and the verse that we're hearing this afternoon. Thank you.
friends all stood to watch the fight by the banks of Kingsley Mere, and they brought to her feet her own true knight so wounded on a bier. Oh, let not, he said, while yet I live, the cruel foe me take, but with those lips one sweet kiss give, and cast me in the lake. Around his neck she wound her arms, and she kissed his lips so pale. And evermore, the war's alarms came louder up the vale. She drew him to the lake's deep side, where the red heath fringed the shore, and plunged with him beneath the tide, and they were seen no more. They were seen no more. They were seen no more. They were seen no more.
George Eliot was born Mary Ann Evans on the South Farm on the Arbury estate here in Nuneaton, and when she was 5 months old, the family moved to Griff, halfway between Nuneaton and Bedworth. And we know that Coventry had a huge impact on George Eliot, Mary Ann Evans as she was then. Similarly, Coventry has always been part of Denis's life. He was 7 years old when he witnessed Coventry burning, as Linda's already told us. And when he retired back here, he regularly, every week, would go off on his jaunts to Coventry to buy his fruit and veg and have a haircut. Maybe he'd go to his precious Marks and Spencer's. I think he was a bit of a food snob as well. And discuss the football scores with his nephew Paul on a Saturday afternoon, and other things he did, and the effect they had on him was, first of all, he attended Coventry Cathedral for some time, meeting people who would have a lasting impact upon him. He used to keep saying to me, "Your namesake, Viv, is a bishop now." Some of you Anglicans know who I'm talking about. These people encouraged him to apply for a master's in Christian spirituality at Sarum College in Salisbury. And he was also a key member of Ruth Harris's literary class. And her influence, he acknowledges on the first page of his master's thesis, which I was rereading the other night. I have a copy of it with me, actually, if anyone's interested to look at it. It's actually on, all those years ago, really, before I knew him, it's on Silas Marner. He wrote his master's thesis on Silas Marner. I learned so much reading it again the other night that I have an idea in the future of compiling some of Denis's writings. They deserve to be wider known. He wrote like an angel, I thought. And I remember when when the George Eliot Review accepted his submission. He was so humble. He didn't almost realise his gifts, I think.
This isn't in my script, but I was reminded of it by John's comments of going to Spain and seeing the flamenco dancers. And Denis was a very keen admirer of flamenco. And we even had some lessons from Karen Ann Herbert at the Children's Coat and Heritage Centre, and lots of us were trying to emulate Karen Ann's skill, including Denis. But also there's your reference to Connie Fulmer. When we went to Spain, and Denis was really excited about having this meal and then seeing the proper flamenco dancers. And he was up sort of at the far end near to the dancers. We were back much nearer the door, and sitting opposite us was Connie. And Connie had an allergy to mushrooms, and the room was rather gloomy. And at some stage in the evening, Connie said, "I think I've eaten a mushroom." And we said, "Well, how bad will it be?" "Oh," she said, "it would be fatal." But she hadn't actually eaten a mushroom for about 50 years, so she was rather hoping that the effect wouldn't be as bad as, could have been. Well, it turned out that either it wasn't a mushroom or the allergy had disappeared, because she went on and continued with us for the rest of the trip, and for several years more. But I'm asking the question really of what Denis gained from the George Eliot Fellowship, and what did he give to us. I think we gained far more. But Denis was always, as people have said, very humble and very modest, and he would always say, "Oh no, I've learnt a lot." And Denis, as Pam has said, is an educator and a mentor. So I like the word mentor as a good one, Pam. So what he gained from the George Eliot Fellowship, I think, was the chance, which he valued, to enlighten us, to challenge us. And that gave him pleasure, as it would any teacher. But you couldn't half listen to Denis. His arguments were erudite, beautifully expressed, especially when written. But in the reading groups that he and Viv did, sometimes at the almshouses, as Pam said, and once in the snug at Griff, Denis was not just going through the motions of, reheating academic notes from earlier years, because often the book he was leading on was one that he hadn't read himself before either. And so he often brought a new dimension, I think, to our reading, because it was new to him. It was a joint exploration, which was exhilarating and bold. And if you couldn't keep up, and sometimes we couldn't, there was always the luxury biscuits, which several people have mentioned. He was a good customer of Marks and Spencer's. He'd go to the Rico Marks and Spencer's to obtain them. And remember, he wasn't a driver, so it was a real effort. Denis thought nothing of getting on buses and trains. He did it all his life. And indeed, in the George Eliot Fellowship trip to Geneva at the end of 2018, which Denis didn't actually organise but attended, which would have been a novel experience for him, and probably allowed him to be a bit more relaxed there. But Denis gave a lecture to our group and to a large group of Valerie students, and of course it was fascinating to hear. But like the archetypal academic, Denis could get so involved in his discussion and thoughts that he forgot the outside world temporarily. When we were in Geneva, we were all travelling by trams to meet in one spot. And we all alighted, but realised that Denis and Brenda were missing. They were so engrossed in their discussion that they hadn't noticed the tram stop, or us getting off the tram. And it went off with them still deep in discussion, and us tried to shout and wave to them as the tram disappeared. They didn't actually realise and got back to join us. But that was sort of typical. Actually, it wasn't typical of Denis, it was more typical of Brenda. They were two together. There was an occasion when Brenda was coming up from London and was deeply engrossed either in a conversation or a book, and forgot to get off the train at Nuneaton. And when they got to Crewe, the porters there were very kind and put her back onto a train that eventually got her back to Nuneaton. But perhaps the biggest contribution to us was those meticulously planned trips to many places, but especially for the fellowship to Florence, to Venice, and to southern Spain. And you'll hear more of those from Mary shortly. And what else did he give to us? Well, we took pleasure in seeing him explain ideas. His enthusiasm was infectious. All good teachers are enthusiastic, and so we caught Denis's enthusiasm. On any coach tour, he would wait until everybody was settled, and we were perhaps on a motorway, and the PA system would crackle, and Denis would give his introductory talk, beautifully prepared, nailing what was important. And I recall sharing some of these talks with him and feeling rather nervous about it because this was Denis's domain that he asked me. And I remember talking about W.B. Yeats when we went to Ireland and the war poets when we went to Belgium and the World War I battlefields. But really what I said shows one aspect mirroring the other. The key to it is intelligent, wise, informed enthusiasm and joy at sharing knowledge. Denis loved imparting it, and we loved to share it with him.
Good afternoon, everyone. Denis's trips in the footsteps of George Eliot were legendary. They absolutely ticked every box. Well organised, fascinating, educational, and of course, great fun. They were all meticulously researched, and even in his 80s, Denis could be found flying off to Venice or to Spain on a recce to check things out before the holiday, because nothing was left to chance. And so everything was easy for us, as Denis had done all the hard work and all the planning. Accommodation, all sorted. Transport and guides, already booked. Entrance fees, paid. He even provided suggestions of places to eat and their distance to the hotels. The only question mark was, were we, mere mortals, able to keep up with this extraordinary octogenarian whose energy, whose curiosity, whose zest for life was second to none? Denis organised trips to Florence, Venice and Spain, tracing the footsteps of George Eliot herself. In Venice there was a guided tour of the magnificent San Marco Basilica and the Doge's Palace. And Denis showed us the hotel also, where Johnny Cross had jumped from his bedroom window into the Grand Canal whilst on honeymoon with George Eliot. We also had a delightful day trip to Vicenza to see the wonderful Olympic Theatre, the oldest theatre in the world. But Denis also left time for us to do our own thing, such as visit one of the islands, which I actually had the privilege of doing with Denis, or the Guggenheim Collection, another of my favourites, or just a tour of the canals in a gondola. We went to Venice in 2014, when parts of the island were flooded, and I have very happy memories and some amusing photographs of Denis happily wading through the floods near the cathedral in his wellies. Floods, I hasten to add, that were sometimes up to his mid-calf. And looking back, it reminds me what a good sport he was, and how good-natured. 2 years later, and you've already heard some of this, he organised a marvellous trip to Spain, in the steps of the Spanish Gypsy. We stayed in 3 different hotels, visiting Granada, Cordoba and Seville. And as John has already pointed out, when we were travelling from one place to another in the coach, you could always rely on Denis to take control of the microphone and in his own inimitable way start telling us about the surrounding countryside or or where we were headed. He was a mine of information. Whilst in Spain, we enjoyed a guided tour of the glorious Alhambra Palace and gardens. And in the evening, again we've heard about this, through his careful research, Denis had managed to find an authentic and spectacular flamenco show which was put on in local caves. It was absolutely spellbinding. In fact, everyone was so impressed that on our return, we organised our own flamenco evening, led by Karen Ann Herbert. And Denis was not reluctant to get up on his still nimble feet and try out a few steps. He was such fun. Whilst in Spain, he also fitted in an excursion to the breathtaking mountaintop city of Ronda, so that we could experience the dramatic views. And I do remember Connie being really impressed with that. I've got a lovely photograph of her with Margaret. And we could then look down in the deep gorge. So he seemed to think of everything. The fact is, Denis's trips were a delight. A masterclass in organisation. Events that will stay in our memories forever, as will the fond memories that we all have of Denis. Because he was a truly wonderful person, warm, kind and loving, an irreplaceable one-off who brought interest and joy to us all. And I felt privileged to call him my friend. He is so sadly missed.
we two were maying down the stream of the soft spring breeze, like children with violets playing in the shade of the whispering trees. Oh, that we two were maying down the stream of the soft spring breeze, like children with violets playing in the shade of the whispering trees. Oh, that we two were maying. Oh, that we two were maying. Oh, that we two were maying among the whispering trees. Oh, that we two sat dreaming on the sward of some sheep trimmed down, watching the white mist stealing over river, mead, and town. Oh, that we two sat dreaming. Oh, that we two sat dreaming. Oh, that we two sat dreaming on the sward of some down. Oh, that we two sat dreaming, sat
beautiful. Denis would have loved it. Thank you so much. I first came across Denis through his writing. One Christmas, John Burton forwarded me a certain man's Christmas letter. Thought I might like to read it. Do you remember Denis's letters? Yes. I was just bowled over, not just by the quality of his writing, but the content, what this man had done during the past year, at home and abroad, the concerts, the art galleries, the museums he'd been to, the books he'd read, the ideas he had. I was intrigued to meet him. Possibly our first meeting was not that auspicious. At the time I was a teacher at King Edward Sixth Form College in Nuneaton, and we were adapting some of George Eliot's novels for the students to perform. After one of my plays, this man came up, Denis, and he said he didn't like my ending. I think I'd killed off poor Hetty Sorrel in Adam Bede, rather than doing what George Eliot did and sent her to the colonies. I wasn't sure which I'd rather. Anyway, we grew to be close friends. As well as the trips abroad Denis organised, we also went on some holidays in the UK, including one to Tenby, to track down the hotel where George Eliot was staying with her partner George Henry Lewis, and where she was inspired to write the opening lines of her very first novel, Scenes of Clerical Life. That book was published in 1857, and there is a plaque on the building where they stayed. It's worth finding that in Tenby. It's quite near the harbour. Denis enlarged my world. I think that was his gift. He enlarged all our worlds. We would visit art galleries in London and go to shows. It was on such a trip that I met his beloved great-niece, Lisa, who was trained to be an artist. She speaks so fondly of the importance of him in her life, how from her youth he always encouraged her. During her student years he would send her carefully chosen books that she couldn't possibly afford as a student, and regularly take her to art galleries and exhibitions. We went to her first exhibition in Coventry, and also visited her when she was artist in residence at Warwick School. I have one of her drawings on my wall at home. Another holiday was based in the New Forest, where Denis showed me the Catholic boarding school where he attended as a child. This was a formative time in his life. In his memoir he writes, "In these idyllic surroundings I became a novice, which meant I had a whole year of not seeing the family. I went on to the next stage, the study of philosophy, and I seemed to be good at this, for there was talk of sending me to a university in Rome. But doubts were creeping in. The priesthood was a commitment for life. With my sheltered life, did I really know what I was giving up? After a lot of soul searching, I came away, did my national service." I can't imagine Denis in national service actually, and attended university in London. Denis's attitude to religion was, as with everything he approached, informed and thoughtful. In recent years, every Sunday he would quietly take a bus from Bedworth to Coventry, where he would sit and have a coffee and a bacon roll, and wait for the next bus to Birmingham, in order to absorb the High Latin Mass at Cardinal Newman's, the Oratory. I think he was the most spiritual person I knew, for he was without malice. He was love personified. He didn't have a bad word to say about anyone. He was kind to people. I think he personified George Eliot's Religion of Humanity. But you know, I think Denis was never happier than when he was rambling about the countryside with his walking group, or tending his garden, growing his vegetables, or watching the birds nesting. I close with the words of Walter Savage Landor. "I strove with none, for none was worth my strife. Nature I loved, and next to nature, art. I warmed both hands before the fire of life." Denis, my dear friend, our dear friend, Denis, more than anyone I know or knew, or maybe will know, he warmed both hands before the fire of life.
Oh, may I join the choir invisible of those immortal dead who live again in minds made better by their presence, live in pulses stirred to generosity, in deeds of daring rectitude, in scorn for miserable aims that end with self. sublime that pierce the night like stars, and with their mild persistence urge man's search for vaster issues. So to live is undying music, to make undying music in the world. Breathing a beauteous order that controls with growing sway the growing life of man, so we inherit that sweet purity for which we struggled, failed, and agonized with widening retrospect that bred despair. Rebellious flesh that would not be subdued, a vicious parent shaming still its child, poor anxious penitence is quick dissolved, its discords quenched by meeting harmonies, die in the large and charitable air. And all are rarer, better, truer self that sobbed religiously in yearning song, that watched to ease the burden of the world, laboriously tracing what must be and what may yet be better. So within a worthier image for the sanctuary, and shaped it forth before the multitude, divinely human, raising worship so to higher reverence, more mixed with love, that better self shall live till human time shall fold its eyelids, and the human sky be gathered like a scroll within the tomb, unread forever. This is life to come, which martyred men have made more glorious for us who strive to follow. May I reach that purest heaven, be to other souls the cup of strength in some great agony, enkindle generous ardor, feed pure love, beget the smiles that have no cruelty, be the sweet presence of a good diffused, and in diffusion ever more intense. So shall I join the choir invisible, whose music is the gladness of the world.
That was a wonderful experience, wasn't it? Thank you so much, Rupert. Dennis Viver said, Dennis would have been embarrassed by the praise we have cast upon him. But he would have absolutely adored the music. He would have come for the music and blocked his ears when we were talking about him. But that was wonderful, and we waited a long time. I think COVID pandemic intervened between this being suggested and happening, that particular piece of music, to the choir invisible. So wonderful. It's fitting then to follow that with some very famous final words from George Eliot herself. The last few lines of Middlemarch. The reference is to Dorothea, of course, but the words could equally well apply to our dear friend Denis. But the effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffuse. For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric facts, and that things that are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. thank you all for attending this celebration of Denis's life. And thank you to our contributors, to Linda, Pam, John, Mary, and Viv, who organised most of the framework of this afternoon. And to our musicians, Lawrence, Edmund, and the genius behind the musical choices, Rupert. Refreshments will be available in the main hall, and most of you know your way there, but in case you don't, it's either through as many doors as you can there, and you eventually get into the main hall, or outside and down and then into the next door. There will be a slideshow. I'm not suggesting that you're all going to sit and watch slides. They're just slides which should change every 10 seconds, but I can't make that work. So I'm going to have to just, there are no captions, there's no commentary. I've just selected 100 pictures that showed Denis, which was harder than you think. One of the things that we have commented on is his modesty. Whenever pictures were being taken, Denis would try his hardest not to be there. You had to creep up on him. But in the group pictures, it's really noticeable, and it's looking through all these pictures that brought it home to me the last couple of days. Denis is either on the extreme left or right, hoping to be cut off, by other people, or hiding 3 rows back. And that was typical of the man. He did so much. All those tricks were down to his genius, really. It's wonderful. But he's so self-effacing. And then there will be some written information as well that Linda mentioned earlier. Tea, cake. Denis was a great one for cake. We've mentioned his liking for biscuits, but he was pretty partial to cake as well. And volumes of pictures and so on to have a look at, and stop as long as you wish. Finally, just a sort of business reminder, which again Denis would approve of this. Places are still available for next Saturday's George Eliot Day at the Children's Celtic Heritage Centre. And even more places are available for next Sunday's George Eliot Country Tour. And I do have some flyers or leaflets for those if you're interested. And donations towards the cost of this afternoon would be welcomed. There are some plates, I think, at the back. Thank you all very much. I hope you feel that we have celebrated Denis's life. He would have expected, in anything he did, that the standards would be as high as they could possibly be. I think we've achieved that. So, thank you all. Thank you, Denis.